I parked across the street instead of pulling into my parents' driveway. My husband Evan was answering one last work email and told me he'd be inside in a minute. "I'll let them know we're here," I said. He smiled without looking up. "Don't let your mother recruit you into washing dishes before dinner." I laughed and walked toward the front porch. My hand was inches from the door when I heard my mother's voice through the partly open kitchen window. "Don't stress about the debt," she told my younger brother. "We'll have your sister cover it. She never refuses family." A chair scraped against the floor. "What if she asks questions this time?" my brother asked. My father answered before my mother could. "She won't. She always feels guilty saying no." I stood perfectly still. There wasn't anger at first, only a strange emptiness. They weren't discussing whether I could help. They were discussing me as if I were a savings account with feelings attached. I stepped backward as quietly as I had approached. When I reached the sidewalk, Evan looked up from the car and immediately knew something had changed. "You didn't knock." I shook my head. "Drive," I whispered. He didn't ask another question until we were halfway home. When I finally repeated every word I'd heard, he kept both hands on the steering wheel. "I've wondered for years why every emergency somehow became yours," he said carefully. "They're my family." "I know. I've helped because I wanted to." "I know that too." He waited before speaking again. But wanting to help and being expected to help aren't the same thing. Neither of us spoke for several miles. That evening, he opened my banking app beside me at the kitchen table. "I want you to do something that will probably feel uncomfortable." I frowned. "Move every penny that's sitting in your everyday account into the investment account only you can access. Review every automatic transfer. Change every password. Make sure nobody assumes they have a say in your finances." I stared at him. "You think they'll try to take money?" "No." He paused. "I think they'll expect you to volunteer it before you've had time to think." It sounded dramatic, maybe even unnecessary. Still, I followed every step, not because I distrusted my parents, because for the first time, I realized I had never truly protected myself from expectations. The week that followed was unusually quiet. No calls, no family group messages. Part of me convinced itself I had misunderstood everything. Then my phone rang. My mother, she skipped every greeting. "Your brother's in trouble. He's fallen behind again." "I'm sorry to hear that. We worked out a solution." That sentence landed heavily. "We need you to pay off what's left. He'll recover eventually." I closed my eyes. "How much?" She named a number that was larger than the down payment we've been saving for our own home. "I can't." There was silence. Not because she expected refusal, because she had never prepared for it. "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean exactly that. He's your brother, and I'm your daughter." Another silence. This one lasted longer. She ended the call politely enough, but without warmth. 2 days later there was a knock at our front door. My parents stood outside. My brother stayed near the car, staring at his phone. Mom smiled too brightly. We thought talking face to face would be easier. We invited them inside. The conversation never became loud. That almost made it harder. My father explained responsibility. My mother talked about sacrifice. Neither asked what postponing our own future would cost us. They only described what refusing would cost my brother. Evan listened quietly. When there was finally a pause, he said, "We're actually leaving in 20 minutes. My mother looked confused. "For what?" "A financial planning appointment." She blinked. "We can finish this first." "We can't," he answered. "It's already scheduled." I almost suggested canceling. Instead, I stood up and picked up my coat. An hour later we sat across from our financial advisor, whom Evan had insisted we meet after our conversation outside my parents' house. After reviewing our accounts, she looked directly at me. "You've done well building your savings," she said. Then she asked an unexpected question. "Has anyone been pressuring you to provide financial support you don't freely want to give?" I hesitated. "Sometimes." She nodded as though she'd heard that answer many times before. She calmly explained the protections already in place after our recent account changes, confirmed that no one besides me had authority over my funds, and reminded me that financial decisions made under guilt often become recurring obligations rather than one-time solutions. It wasn't dramatic. No one was accused, no voices were raised. Yet hearing those words from a professional made something settle inside me. This wasn't selfishness, it was stewardship. When we returned home, my parents were gone. A handwritten note waited beneath the flower pot. "We're disappointed. We expected more." I read it twice, then folded it into my pocket. Months passed. My brother eventually negotiated a repayment plan with his creditors and picked up extra weekend work. It wasn't easy, but it was his plan. Family dinners became less frequent. Some conversations stayed careful, others never happened. One afternoon, my mother called. Not to ask for money, just to ask how work was going. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in years, it wasn't transactional either. That evening, I found the old note while cleaning a drawer. I looked at it for a moment before tearing it into small pieces. Not because I had won, because I finally understood the difference between generosity and obligation, and that understanding was worth protecting.